When I played Genshin all the way back in 2020, a day after it was released actually, I never knew the impact it would have everywhere. No one knew that I was gonna bang this hard. Now, there were a multitude of reasons why it got the popularity it did. The character designs, the pretty good advertising all things considered, the Breath of the Wild comparisons I remember specifically, and the graphics. I'll still say Genshin's art style is probably one of the most beautiful ones I've seen in my entire life. It was the first thing that shot you in the eye, and the animations contributed to it as well. Characters were bouncy, smooth, and all had life to them. What made it all come together for me at least, was the world of Genshin. Genshin's region and world design has always gave me goosebumps, and it was the first time I felt like I was in an actual world. I could walk from Mondstadt to Liyue, take in the scenery, question what happened here, what happened there, why does the path stop here? Helping with the gorgeous environment and world design was the soundtrack, and it's probably Genshin's best aspect in my opinion. Forget the characters and art, none of it truly works well unless you have the music to ease you into this new world. All of it combined made a world that felt real, intriguing, and most importantly, comfy. It was a world I wanted to explore forever until I realized that I gotta go to work today. Now, I've not played Genshin in a while, which is why I'm only talking about the early regions, and I'm in no way saying that the later regions aren't as comfy. I'm sure they are. This is just more so of a personal video going over my thoughts on Genshin's regions and how at home I felt when traveling through all of them. Now, am I gonna go back to playing Genshin? Hell no. Go watch another YouTuber for that. But let's take a look at Genshin's early regions and discuss the feelings they give. For me, this is my video. In order to create a setting that feels right at home, you gotta match two things, the environment and the music. Imagine you're in the medieval area and dubstep starts playing. You know how jarring that is? Unless that's the point, you should not be trying to attempt that at all. Matching the music to the scene is such a hard task, and it applies even to video editing. If I'm talking about something emotional in the video, I gotta make sure to put an emotional track that corresponds with what I'm talking about. It's even more difficult for Genshin's case, because while there are certain locations that have tracks tied to them, a lot of it has to be randomized in a sense, since it's an open world game. Genshin knows this, so with Mondstadt, they create music that corresponds perfectly with the entire region, no matter where you are. Mondstadt has a medieval European style, and you can tell that especially with Mondstadt City. The way the houses are built, wagons are chilling around, people dressed in the style you'd expect. It immediately gives Mondstadt an identity, and in an open world game with so many regions now, having an identity is important. The last thing you want to do for your game is make everything blend in with each other. Since the region was medieval inspired, the soundtrack followed suit. Using medieval style lutes, pianos, tin whistle instruments, and other tools I definitely don't know of, Yu-Ping Chen, the composer for early Genshin, produced one of the best soundtracks for a game I've heard in a very long time. Talking about how music feels is such a subjective feeling, but if I were to describe Mondstadt's music, I'd say home. Mondstadt's the first region you explore, and so the soundtrack eases you in with some of the most soothing tracks in the game. It feels so magical exploring Mondstadt. The whole region feels like a fairy tale, with each of the tracks feeling like a lullaby of sorts. I say fairy tale most because 90% of classic fairy tales take place during this time period, a time where castles were more common, villages were around, and nature was present all over. Helping with this is the color palette from Mondstadt, which is filled with pastel greens and blues that elicit a calming aura. It's very beautiful, and another thing that separates regions visually. Also, I was going through some old Genshin cutscenes, and yeah, the Mondstadt cutscenes perfectly give off that old once upon a time feel. Even at night, Mondstadt's identity is apparent in the way its colors brighten even more like a perfect full moon. It has the presence of being free, and given the whole venti theme and being free and wind and stuff, it makes sense. Oh yeah, I can also mention it here, but the fact there's tracks for both day and night to certain locations is also amazing. You could be crafting and doing side quests all around Mondstadt, and having the time pass by naturally and hearing the music transition from the lively crowd instruments to the soft, calm, long notes to signify that it's time to close this book, it makes you feel something. To prepare for this video, I actually reinstalled Genshin to explore around and see if the comfy feeling still exists. Obviously I have bias because I grew up in these regions for the most part, but hey man, it's the little things that matter in life as you grow up. Walking around the world helped me appreciate the finer details in the world of Genshin, and Mondstadt as a whole. I really like the fact that Mondstadt is very tightly knitted, like it's pretty much just one main community and everything else is just wildland. It makes exploring Mondstadt so free. You're unlikely to come across any civilization, and the little bits of civilization you do see add more life to the world. Like, look at these broken down wagons. What happened here? What happened to the people who were using them? These are the questions that pop in my head while exploring, and knowing all this was purposely placed by developers to make the world feel more alive makes me very impressed. I do think Genshin should get more praise for its cel-shaded art style. It certainly wasn't the first, no doubt, but being there when the game first released was mind-blowing for what I was seeing. A real-life anime is what most people were calling it, and almost 5 years later, that statement is still so true. During my recording, I often found myself stopping just to admire everything. Combined with the music, it made for some of the most peaceful scenes, I want to say. I guess I can talk about Dragonspine now since that's part of Mondstadt, and I want to cover all bases before I move on to Liyue, even though the Dragonspine OST came out after Liyue, but blah, 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 just follow my lead. Dragonspine, while being incredibly small compared to any region, still has a very distinct identity, and I'm not talking about its temperature. It has like the most bullshit gimmick ever, so thank God 100% it, so I never have to go back here again. The most distinct aspect of Dragonspine for me is the soundtrack, and this is the part where I'm going to start reaching extensively, so brace yourself. This soundtrack reeks of loneliness, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Everything is cold, desolate, and it really feels like you're the only person on this mountain. It's cold, it's rough, and as you're pushing for the deadly temperature, it seems like your life is flashing before your eyes constantly, and the soundtrack resembles that. It isn't frightening, it isn't scary, it's peaceful, calm, and relaxing. The slowish tune of every song seems intentional in the way that it envelops us in the same speed that the song is in. Slow, taking its time. It's like it's making us reflect on the memories that we passed by so fast back then, and is now telling us to take a second to breathe, and really reflect on that memory. Maybe some things don't exist in that memory. Maybe some things have changed. It's when we're all alone that we really reflect on everything, and matching it with the setting of Dragonspine, it fits so perfectly. I'm sure many of you have done this before. Being up at 3 AM, everyone's asleep, no one is around, just you, yourself, and your thoughts. A time where you can really question what went wrong with you. Sorry, that sounds depressing as fuck. Have you guys ever played Celeste before? That game has the same vibes, mountain, mostly alone, reflecting. You know, the usual. Even back then, these tracks felt nostalgic to me. I remember talking to some friends of mine that the tracks remind me of old school Flash games I used to play during class, and it's weird how timeless certain music sounds. Like, no matter what time you listen to it, it's always gonna remind you of past memories. The only other soundtrack that I can think of that does the same thing is Minecraft. No matter where or when I listen to it, I'm gonna be thinking of past memories. And it may not even be Minecraft related. It can just be a memory that was brushed aside for a decade waiting to be uncovered. Dragonspine is like the perfect visual metaphor for the feeling of being lonely and what it does to you. It can feel tense, a little scary at first, but only by having nothing, you'll remember what it was like to have something. The soundtrack embodies this by showing traces of sadness, loneliness, along with feelings of happiness knowing that we did experience those things. It's very complicated is what I'm trying to get at, and obviously it'll hit different for many people because no one's experienced the same exact life as you. I think of old Flash games and Discord calls when I hear this music, while someone else can probably think of like a winter vacation they went with their family. And all of it is valid, it's just a time to remember. But we can't remember all the time or else we'll get trapped in an eternal loop but we try to live out the good old days, so let's move on to the final segment for this video, Liyue. In order to start with Liyue, we need to talk about Mondstadt's size first. Even from a structural standpoint, the tiny compact size of Mondstadt was very purposeful. They don't want to overload you with too much, so they start small. It seems to be a very common thing in open world games, and it makes sense. When you give someone too much control, they're not going to know what to do, so give them baby steps. Show the potential of this world. And once you complete Mondstadt, holy shit. Liyue is something else, man. The first thing that strikes you when you first fall down the path to Liyue is the color palette. Also, can we admire that the entire world is connected? I was searching up videos and I found where you can walk from Mondstadt all the way to the latest region, and that's just amazing to see. Incredible world design. Anyway, the colors used for Liyue are a lot more warmer, more orangey, and it spreads to the entire region. While Mondstadt was primarily blue, with most places using the natural blue light to light their locations, Liyue is filled with lanterns and lamps everywhere. Also, the grass is orange. Everything's orange. That isn't a negative thing, by the way. It just goes to make these regions more unique. And it isn't just the color palette that makes Liyue different. There's a lot more structures in Liyue, thanks to its larger size, but also it seems more colonized, if that's okay of a word to use. Mondstadt is kept to itself and only had small communities out and about, but Liyue has established colonies all around the region. You can find soldiers chilling around, and locations all have a homemade feel to them, stone brick steps and walls to help guide you along the way. One thing you'll realize when you're in Liyue is how endless it feels. Liyue is extremely larger than Mondstadt, and you can feel it. The multiple paths, the more buildings scattered across, and the elevation. This is by far the one thing I remember Liyue for, besides another aspect I'll talk about soon. Liyue is tall. It has mountains galore, and it's visually striking too. Each of the mountains varies in height and all have a different sense of purpose, like you could have a unique adventure depending on which one you travel to. It helps that the area is just completely devoid of human life. With Mondstadt, the tallest structure, I think, was the one in Mondstadt City, and that was full of life with people around, and it gave off the perfect vibe of a man-made community. For Dragonspine, the tallest point was was pure loneliness. Being lonely just to be lonely. You did this to yourself. And for what? To get frozen to death? Sometimes when we're at our lowest, we do things subconsciously to make ourselves go lower. It's a very complicated feeling, choosing between either feeling alone or lonely. People tend to get these terms confused, and understandable. They both do mean the same thing, but there is nuance within each of the definitions. Alone is simply the status of being alone, meaning right now there's no one around you except yourself. Being lonely represents the feeling of being alone, either physically, emotionally, or mentally. You could be around people but still feel lonely because of these criteria. So why am I bringing all this up? Well, because while Dragonspine evokes the feeling of loneliness being at the highest point, Liyue does not. I can say right now, I'm alone, but I do not feel lonely. I feel like the Genshin composers saw this exact scene and thought, yeah, I know exactly what to play here. All of Genshin's aspects come together to perform a beautiful scene that honestly was what Genshin was made for. Fuck the gameplay, fuck the gacha, this is what Genshin's goal was. To evoke that emotion in you. Honestly, when I came across this view, the entire video visualized in my head at this point. The warm colors, the bright sun, and that fucking soundtrack. Liyue's soundtrack is out of this world. As much as I love Mondstadt and Dragonspine, nah. When I think of Genshin, I think of Liyue and only Liyue's soundtrack. It should go without saying, but Liyue's soundtrack perfectly represents Liyue. The instruments used, timing and beats, and whatever musical terms musicians use, it's perfect. Liyue is heavily based on China, and China has such a rich history when it comes to music. I'm not an expert on this, but it has the vibe. It has the sauce. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I should probably bring this up now, but I really love that for every track, the corresponding title of the track is related to the music itself. One thing I've always adored is how much story is put into every element of Genshin. The world design, the cutscenes, but also the music. Music is often referred to as a language, and you'd be hard pressed to find someone that disagrees with that statement. As you can see with how I've been talking in this video, I consider music a very, very important aspect of anything. It's a way of words. It tells you what's going on in this location and what this place represents. Qingsua Village is a perfect example of this. It seems every note is sharing a piece of its history with you, showcasing how long this place has existed for. Calm, peaceful, but something so captivating you could spend your whole entire life here. Despite that, there's a sense of longing, sadness maybe. Maybe someone's waiting for someone. Maybe those glazed lilies haven't respawned yet. I'd really love to do like a video where I would have non-Genshin players listen to these tracks and describe how it makes them feel, because I feel even without the context of where the music plays, you can still get the exact feelings as if you were there, playing the game. That's just one example. Music is often attributed to places, and especially characters. Whenever I think of a sweet smile, the only thing in my mind is Amber because of how much the theme plays when she's around. She's one of the first characters you meet, so it creates a special bond whenever you hear that track. Call me stupid for this, but Genshin was one of the first few games where I started recognizing motifs, certain notes that would appear in every song that gave off a familiar vibe. I first noticed it with Undertale, but that's unrelated right now. Genshin is filled with motifs, and you can find so many forums detailing the exact ones and how they fit into the whole narrative of Genshin. I love them though. It creates the feeling of familiarity no matter where you are. No matter how high, no matter how low, the world of Genshin is always with you, and the music will always remind you of that. The authenticity of the soundtrack also comes from where the music was recorded. All of the music was recorded in their significant regions. Mondstadt's soundtrack was recorded in the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and Liyue was recorded in the Shanghai Symphony Orchestra. If you want to get authentic music, you gotta go to the source. I'm pretty sure Sumeru and Fontaine did the same thing, but I'm not too sure, so don't quote me on that. I'll always have respect for Yupeng Cheng though. He's genuinely composed some of Genshin's most iconic tracks, and I'm sure that when Genshin passes on, I'll think of it, then think of a track he made because that's how iconic he was. I know he left MiHoYo a year back and hasn't contributed much to the later soundtracks, but I'll always have him to thank for creating so many special memories. The last thing I want to talk about regarding the comfy nature of this game is the world. And I've talked about it already, but I mean the world. Just the world. How much all of it exists at once is something I took note of when replaying the game. When I got to a high point, I had the music kick in and then looked around. I saw mountains and landmarks that were so far in the distance and I realized, Wait, that's a real place. I could go there. What seemed like silhouettes were real locations with their own history that I could walk around in, climb around in, fuck around in, and that genuinely made it all the magical. It's very easy to make an open world boring with nothing to note of, and I'm not saying Genshin lacks this, though there are some places that don't stick out and are just there, but Genshin has more dubs than L's, so I'm gonna let slide. The early world of Genshin is something that means a lot to me, and I'm glad that still remains true in a way. And like, I'm sorry for not talking about the other regions, it's just that I don't have the time. I'm gonna be real, I don't think Genshin's a bad game, it's just that things have changed in my life. My tastes have changed, and Genshin's no longer the game that, you know, is fit for me. I had a nice time talking about Genshin though. It's probably be the last video I make about it, but you know, we had a good run. It's weird to look at my channel and figure out that, yeah, I did make quite a few Genshin videos. What a legacy. Anyway, that's all from me. Subscribe if you liked it, and I guess I'm gonna go do what people normally do on the month of February, which is nothing.